Can I start with a photo, a selfie? Now, I'm just gonna 1, 2, 3, just say good morning. 1, 2, 3. Good morning. Good morning to you. Thank you. All right, let me start my timer because I'm on a time limit apparently. All right. So, like Prescott said, my name is Joe. I'm the editor-in-chief of Lookout. We actually have magazines here for y'all to pick up so you can kind of see the work that we do. But this is not about Lookout. This is about the story of kind of how I have moved the world through a punk way. And so when first asked about this, my brain kind of visualized kind of all the ways in my life, creative or professional, that I've embraced punk rock culture specifically. But the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that A, that would be a bit on the nose. B, talking about punk in that way feels a bit like a study in anthropology where one understands punk but doesn't truly belong to it. And C, dissecting punk or punk rock in that way feels disingenuous and cold, something punk absolutely is not. So instead, I decided that I'd talk a bit about an aspect of punk that I absolutely love, which is its inherent ability to hold on to friction. But more specifically, the friction that comes from holding two truths in your hand at the same time, and neither one of them being convenient. Because at the end of the day, punk is all about challenging narratives and specifically challenging power, and friction, I believe, is the only way to do that. So I wanted to memorize this speech, but instead I'm going to just read from it. All my life, even today, I've never felt completely comfortable in just one space. I truly don't like my world being black and white. I prefer a world in the middle ground, a colorful world, a rainbow world in honor of Pride Month, you could say. So I grew up in here, examples of that. I grew up here in Mesa, but only wanted to hang out in downtown Phoenix. I listened to Placido Domingo in the shower, but fell asleep to Cradle of Filth. I obsessed over cooking complicated cuisines, but man, I do love a greasy spoon so much. My dad was Muslim, my mother was Catholic. And so I was raised in this world of dualities, and I embraced living in this middle, colorful area. So I love the idea of complexity, and because that means that nothing is purely good or bad, nothing is completely right or wrong. And I've always appreciated those complicated conversations that come from that. So is America new to authoritarianism, or has it always been that way? How can we be sure that all religions aren't actually saying the same thing? Is the dress black and blue or white and gold? But the people in my life didn't always appreciate that nuance, especially growing up in the suburbs. Through religion, politics, social expectations, the pressure I felt growing up was clear. Go to college, become a doctor, get married, have kids, buy a house in the suburbs, get a dog and 2 cars. There's two big problems with that. One, I'm gay as shit. So kids would have required a miracle. Not to mention, I told, who were they talking to? I hate children. I hate kids so goddamn much. It's like up there with the word squelch. Like, I just hate it. And two, all I wanted to do was live in a big city and wear high heels. Like, essentially, I just wanted permission to be a freak. But more than anything, I wanted to just live freely in my skin and on my terms. And that freedom was modeled for me with my sister, Melanie. She moved through the world in her own unique way. She lounged in bed with large pink feather boas. She relished stories of people confusing her for Madonna, not because she looked like her, because she had a gap tooth. Still don't understand why people thought she was Madonna. And showing me what it meant to find love and specifically intimacy through chosen family, not just partners. And she lived in that liminal space, both in and out of boxes that people tried to put her in. Unfortunately, when I was 15, she died from complications related to lupus. And suddenly, that colorful world that she had introduced me to, that I had been living in for so long, completely turned gray. And it was a strange place to find myself in because I still couldn't live in this black and white binary in all these boxes, but everything felt muted. The colors felt muted in life. Nothing seemed to matter. And all my optimism for living in that colorful middle felt fake. it felt contrite. So I had to rebuild what it meant to live in color. And I did that by learning how much I absolutely loved being a pain in the ass. See, Melanie died because of money at the end of the day. Her insurance dropped her. Lupus was a pre-existing condition back when it was all the rage to deny people health care for pre-existing conditions. And we couldn't afford the heart and lung transplant that was required for her to live. That felt like an incredible injustice to me. But there were more injustices in my life that I recognized. Like I said, I moved to Prescott said I moved to LA to become an actor. That failed miserably. There's one music video of me out there. I will not tell you how to find it. But while in LA, I had a job at a Beverly Hills marketing agency where my boss would literally withhold paychecks if I made typos. That left me homeless off and on for a year. I lived in a Hollywood Hills mansion with the guy. Does anybody remember the show Blind Date? Do you remember like the sexy, scuzzy splash saunas they would go to hook up at the end? That was the guy who owned it. And I was a personal assistant to a live-in personal assistant, and he berated his girlfriend constantly and used his wealth to threaten people who he didn't agree with. So years later, when I decided to go back to school, really, period, I channeled that rage into a career that I never saw coming, which was writing and journalism. Now, every good journalist I know kind of has this similar story. Something in their life felt deeply wrong, and they picked up a pen or a mic because they wanted to do something about it. But like other journalists, were often skeptical of power to work inside government, and were too even-handed to work within the binaries of advocacy. So you might say that every good journalist is able to live comfortably in that gray area between black and white. But my first job out of college was at the San Mateo Daily Journal in the San Francisco Peninsula. And I wrote the police blotter every day, and occasionally got to cover a real story when the senior reporters were gone, getting drunk, doing the typical reporter stuff. And one of my first pieces was the county health officials were using Grindr, the gay dating app, to catfish gay men. And like it was really obvious. They were using like stock photos of like a white guy waving. But they were luring them into thinking they were, getting laid. But instead, they'd walk up in a government parking lot and see this big van, and they were getting tested for STIs. So the gays were up in arms. They were pissed off. How dare you infiltrate my sex space? But at the same time, HIV rates were rising in the peninsula, and the stunt actually got people on antiretrovirals who had never known they were HIV positive. So that was the moment I started to recognize that my color, the one that I had missed so long, was starting to come back because I found joy in crafting stories built on nuance, not outrage. So journalism let me live in this complicated middle to hold power accountable, but still seek understanding. And I fell head over heels with it. I fell in love with it because I craved those in-between spaces. I wanted to build bridges and also build community so we could care about each other beyond the length of our driveways. But even in journalism, I didn't quite fit in. I was always the troublemaker. I called out reporters who missed sources. I pushed back when stories missed the nuance that I truly hold dear. And I challenged the clickbait era of BuzzFeed when we were starting to blow up these shitty headlines to get people to click in and not give people in the information they wanted. And I earned a reputation as a rabble rouser. One of my editors actually called me a punk. They weren't wrong. When I was covering, an example of when I was covering prisons and police for Spotlight in Pennsylvania during COVID, I reported on how elderly inmates were being denied medical care and early release. And just to kind of paint the picture, this is a state that has the oldest prison population in the nation because there's so many people who are geriatric who are in prison. And there is a hospice prison in Pennsylvania. And during COVID, they weren't releasing them, they weren't giving them meds. So I was reporting on it, and I got really close because it was my job to find people who were being affected by this. 2 of them died of COVID. And I tweeted online when Twitter was a place for journalists to go. I tweeted online, I was so angry that like it's immoral, something to the effect of like it's immoral that our government can't take care of the people in their care. My editor immediately called me. Take it down, she said. It shows bias. And I thought to myself, how can it be biased to show empathy towards another human being dying? Isn't it our job as reporters to show a light against injustice? Whether or not like what that injustice is, it's subjective, but arguably somebody dying is an injustice. But I took it down. But as a fuck you, I launched an OnlyFans. And what I did is I talked about my beat, prisons and police, while deep-throating tacos in little to no clothing. If she was going to police my online presence, she'd have to pay me $10 a month and watch me do it in the fall. It's still online, by the way, although it's rated G now. It's called Let's Talk About Justice. You can probably Google it. I'll put a link. Another example. When my editors refused to run a story about deaths in jail across the state, I called them cowards and then leaked the data to prison advocates. And that data helped force local governments to start tracking deaths more accurately. And 3 years ago, probably what brought me today, I told my editors here in Arizona at the Republic that if they wanted to cover my community, their community, they needed to do it with nuance, empathy, not just pride parades, bad bills, and really shitty op-eds that just painted us as inhuman. My editor said I was wrong, so I started the Substack, got $500,000 from the American Journalism Project, and turned it into what it is now, which is the nation's only accountability nonprofit news site. That editor still avoids me to this day because we scooped the Arizona Republic weekly when they said our community was not powerful enough or important enough to cover. And honestly, that's pretty damn cool. Because punk to me is about challenging power, like I said, and giving it back to the people who deserve it. It's about refusing the easy answers. It's about refusing the boxes and refusing the binaries, and especially refusing the bullshit. It's about living in that colorful space even when the world tries to drain it from you. And as Henry Rollins, punk rocker, once said, questioning anything and everything to me is punk. So if that's the measure, then yeah, I'm pretty fucking punk. Thank you.